She gave her only blanket to a dying dog. Then everything changed. The night was sharp with hunger and frost. In the corner of a city no one cared to name, a little girl curled beneath a broken stairwell, hugging a tattered blanket to her chest. Lina hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her breath rose in small clouds, and the silence was deafening. Then she heard it, a soft, broken whimper carried on the wind. She turned. By the trash bins, half hidden in shadow, lay a large German shepherd, ribs visible beneath patchy fur, eyes glassy, but aware. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He was dying. Lina had nothing. No food, no family, no hope. But she did the only thing her heart told her was right. She walked over and gave him her blanket. That night, 2 souls, one forgotten by the streets, the other abandoned by war, lay under a street lamp together. And neither knew it yet, but the world had just shifted. The wind scraped down the alley like it had claws, sharp, biting, merciless. It tugged at the frayed hem of Lina's coat, if it could still be called that. The fabric, once pink, now hung in dull gray shreds from her shoulders, sleeves barely reaching her wrists. She tightened the coat around her thin frame, shivering as the cold bled through the seams and sank into her bones. Chicago didn't care that she was only 13. She kept her head down as she walked, boots too big and soles nearly smooth. Her breath came out in wisps, fading fast into the midnight air. Cars passed by just beyond the alley's mouth, headlights sweeping past as if she were a ghost. Somewhere across the street, laughter erupted from inside a warm bar music, and life sealed behind heavy glass doors. She pressed deeper into the shadows. It was the kind of cold that hurt. Not just your skin. It found your chest, your teeth, the inside of your knees. And it brought memories with it. Lina's eyes stung as the wind whipped through a chain-link fence and howled like a warning. She ducked behind an abandoned dumpster, crouching low and curling into herself. This spot, tucked between 2 buildings and half-sheltered by a rusted fire escape, had become a kind of home. If home meant somewhere you wouldn't freeze to death before dawn. She pulled the threadbare blanket from her backpack, more patches than cloth, and wrapped it tight around her. It smelled like damp concrete and old cardboard, but it was all she had left. That and the photo. Carefully, she pulled a laminated hospital ID from the inside of her coat. Her mother's face smiled up at her from a time before the sickness took hold, before the coughing started, before the shelter turned them away, before Lina was alone. Her fingers traced the edge of the card, stiff from age and cold. She didn't cry, not anymore. Tears were for when there was someone to hold you. Out here they just froze on your cheeks. A memory came sharp and fast. Her mother's hand, trembling in a hospital bed. "Don't let them take you to the state. Run if you have to." Lina had nodded. She didn't fully understand then, but she did now. The streets weren't safe, but they were hers. The system only knew how to label and forget. The wind surged again, rattling a loose gutter above her. Lina flinched. The noise didn't scare her, but what came with it did. Rats, sometimes, or worse people. She pressed her back against the wall and pulled her knees to her chest, letting the cold anchor her. Hunger gnawed at her stomach like a wild animal, but she ignored it. That was the first rule out here: learn to make peace with being empty. A siren echoed in the distance. Ambulance or police, she couldn't tell. Didn't matter. Help wasn't for kids like her. She counted the seconds between gusts of wind. A game. A distraction. 1, 2, 3. A metal can clattered in the distance. She froze. It wasn't the wind. Something was moving in the alley, a shuffle, a faint scrape. Not fast, not human. Her heart picked up speed as she turned slowly, peering out from her corner. The shadows stretched long under the flickering amber glow of a street lamp. Snow drifted sideways, tiny specks of white swirling like ghosts. That's when she saw it. At first, she thought it was just a pile of trash. But then it moved, a soft, low sound, barely audible cut through the wind. A whimper. Lina blinked and leaned forward. It was a dog, large. Its fur was tangled with dirt and ice, ribs jutting beneath a thick, once proud coat. It lay curled tight beside a garbage bin, unmoving except for the tremor in its legs. Its head rested against the pavement, nose twitching with shallow breaths. One ear flicked as the wind picked up, then dropped again. Lina's breath caught. Something about the way it lay there, the slow heave of its chest, the surrender in its posture. It struck her, deeply, quietly. She knew that look, not just cold, defeated. The wind roared like a wounded animal through the tight gaps between buildings. Snow fell in angry spirals now, not the soft kind that kissed the ground gently, but the kind that stung your eyes, snuck into your clothes, and made the night feel endless. Lina had wedged herself beneath an old fire escape, its rusted stairs creaking above her with each gust. The wall at her back was cold and cracked, the cement beneath her soaked through from snowmelt and years of neglect. She tucked her chin into her chest, wrapping the blanket tighter, but the wind found her anyway, slicing past metal and brick to reach the thin girl who'd forgotten what warmth felt like. She didn't plan on sleeping. Nights like this weren't made for sleep. They were made for surviving until something softer came along, if it ever did. And then she heard it, faint, almost swallowed by the storm, a sound too fragile to belong in a city like this. A whimper. She stilled, breath held, ears straining. Another whimper barely louder than the rustle of snow against trash bags, but undeniably real. Not the mechanical clatter of the street, not the hiss of wind or hiss of steam from underground pipes. It was alive. Lina peeked out from under the stairwell, pushing aside a loose plastic sheet that hung like a curtain. Her eyes scanned the alley. The snow turned everything a pale blue under the sickly flicker of a dying street lamp. There, just beyond the dumpster. She moved slowly, boots crunching in half-frozen slush. Every step cautious, not just from fear of what or who might be lurking, but from something else, that strange gravity that tugs at you when something is both beautiful and broken. Curled in a crescent shape beside the trash bin was a dog. No, not just any dog. A German shepherd, or what used to be one. Its fur was soaked and matted, the black and tan coat smeared with grime and bloodless wounds. Its eyes were shut tight, jaw clenched as it shivered uncontrollably. One paw twitched, its ribs moved like wings beneath the skin, barely lifting with each breath. Lina crouched low just a few feet away now. Her instincts told her to back off. Big dogs like this could be dangerous, could bite without warning, could lunge if cornered. And this one was clearly sick, injured, or both. But then it let out another sound. Not a growl, a whimper, like a secret escaping from somewhere too tired to hold it in anymore. She looked into its face. The eyes cracked open at her presence just barely, deep amber, dull but aware. And in them, Lina didn't see violence. She saw something else. Fear. Not of her, of everything. She didn't speak at first. Words felt too loud for the moment. Instead, she sat back on her heels and slowly reached into her coat. Not for food, she had none left, but for something just as precious out here. Warmth. She unwrapped the blanket from her shoulders. The cold hit her instantly like a slap to the skin. Her arms broke out in goosebumps. Her fingers, already numb, ached as she extended the cloth toward the dog. He didn't move, didn't growl, didn't flinch. She laid the blanket gently across his back, careful not to touch his fur yet. His body tensed for a second, then loosened, as if even that threadbare piece of fabric was enough to trick his body into believing, for a second, that he hadn't been abandoned. "Hey," she finally whispered, voice hoarse and raw. "You out here too?" The wind died down just long enough for her words to settle between them. The dog blinked. Once, then rested his head back on the concrete. Lina glanced around, no one coming. No eyes in the dark but theirs. "You don't look like you belong here," she murmured, inching closer. He didn't respond, but he didn't pull away either. Cautiously, she reached out with 2 fingers and brushed the edge of his paw. His fur was coarse, icy cold, but under the frost and filth she could feel life, faint, but there. "Same," she said. "I used to have a real home too." She didn't know why she was talking. The words just came, like breath, like instinct. "People used to look at me like I mattered. Now they look through me. Or worse, they don't look at all." The dog shifted slightly, the blanket falling over his shoulder. She tucked it back in gently. "You're not gonna die tonight, okay? Not if I'm still breathing." And then, something remarkable happened. The dog exhaled, not just a breath, but a surrender, and in that moment he shifted his weight, just slightly closer to her. Not much, but enough. Enough to say, "I hear you." Lina blinked hard against the sting in her eyes. She reached up to brush snow from her lashes, and for a second her fingers brushed her cheek. Wet. Tears. She hadn't felt them coming. She settled down beside him, pulled what was left of the blanket to cover them both, and then, without thinking, leaned her head gently against the side of his rib cage. The rise and fall was shallow, but steady. A soft sound rumbled in his throat, not a growl, not a whimper, something in between. She looked at him one more time. "You don't have to trust me tonight," she whispered. "Just stay." He didn't move, but he didn't leave. And that was enough. Outside the alley, the city moved on blinding lights, rushing taxis, strangers with places to be. But under that rusted stairwell, 2 lost souls curled beneath a failing blanket, and for the first time in a long time, neither one of them felt entirely alone. The city didn't stop for cold or for hunger or for the quiet sound of 2 hearts fighting not to give up. Traffic still hummed beyond the alley's edge. Neon lights blinked across puddles half frozen in the cracks of the pavement. Sirens echoed like ghosts from blocks away. But under the shuddering yellow glow of a dying street lamp, Lina sat motionless beside the German shepherd, her breath fogging softly in the space between them. She had given him the blanket. That act alone should have left her trembling and resentful, bare skin now exposed to a wind that felt like it had claws, but she wasn't. Not angry, not afraid. She was present. The kind of stillness that only comes when there's nothing left to lose. The dog, covered in her only piece of warmth, let out a low, gravelly sigh, and didn't move. His head lay flat against the pavement, eyes still half closed, body twitching now and then from pain or cold, maybe both. The blanket didn't do much, but the way his shivers began to ease, just slightly, made her think it mattered. Maybe not to the world, but to him. She leaned back against the brick wall, knees pulled up to her chest, arms tucked inside her coat. Her fingers were raw, her lips cracked. Her stomach ached with that familiar gnawing hollowness that came from not eating for 2 days. But she didn't complain, didn't cry, didn't curse the snow or the wind or whatever twisted fate had brought her here. Instead, she kept her eyes on him. Every breath he took was shaky, fragile. But he was still breathing, and he hadn't run away. That, somehow, meant everything. "Guess we're both the kind they throw away, huh?" she whispered. Her voice barely carried past her own ears, but the dog's ear twitched slightly at the sound. That was enough. She inched closer, not reaching for him, just sharing space, offering her silence, letting him decide. The wind blew again, harder this time. It caught the edge of the blanket, tried to peel it away. Lina reached out and held it down gently with one hand, smoothing it over the dog's back, tucking it beneath his side the way her mother used to tuck in bed sheets at night, back when nights ended with lullabies instead of street noise. He didn't flinch, didn't pull away. He simply let her. That was new. Most people, most creatures, when scared or sick or alone, built walls, bit back, backed off. But not him. It was as if something deep inside him recognized the same thing in her, the same cracked wiring, the same abandonment, the same instinct to survive no matter what. She shifted slightly, letting her side lean into his, careful not to put too much pressure on his ribs. His fur was damp, still cold, but softer than she expected. She felt the rise and fall of his chest, rhythm fragile but steady. And in that moment, surrounded by nothing but rusted dumpsters and falling snow, she didn't feel invisible. The street lamp buzzed above them, flickered once, twice, and then steadied. The light it cast was weak, yellowed, but it bathed them both in a gentle circle of glow. Everything outside that circle felt miles away. She reached up to scratch the back of her neck and caught a glimpse of her reflection in a cracked mirror leaning against the alley wall. A girl who used to smile, now all sharp cheekbones, tangled hair, and shadows under the eyes. A girl who used to be somebody's daughter. Now just another face the world didn't want to see. She looked back at the dog. "You got a name?" she murmured. "Did someone love you once?" No answer, just the soft flutter of his eyes closing, as if the question itself had taken too much energy to hear. She watched him for a while, maybe minutes, maybe more, and then, slowly, the impossible happened. He moved, just a few inches, but he leaned into her, his weight, even light as it was now, pressed against her leg like a tired apology, a trembling offering, not trust, not yet, but proximity, vulnerability, shared heat. Lina swallowed the lump in her throat and laid her hand lightly on his back. The blanket now covered them both, barely enough, but better than nothing, better than being alone. "Okay," she said, barely louder than a breath. "We'll figure this out." The wind howled, swirling up garbage and grit. The lamp blinked once more, threatening to go out. Lina wrapped her arm tighter around the dog's side and held still. The world had forgotten them, but tonight they remembered each other. She closed her eyes and let her head rest lightly against his shoulder. And for the first time in months, as snow drifted down like ash from a quiet sky, she didn't fall asleep afraid. It was the quiet that woke her, not the kind born of peace, but the kind that followed storms, heavy, watching, like the city was holding its breath. Lina stirred beneath the thin layer of cloth and frost, her fingers curled instinctively under her chin. For a moment she didn't open her eyes. She didn't want to. Sleep had been kind last night, almost merciful, not dreamless, but softer than usual. No running, no sirens, no hospital machines screaming in the dark. Just warmth and breathing. And something solid pressed against her side. Her lashes fluttered. And there he was. The dog was still there, still curled beside her, still wrapped in what was left of the blanket, his nose tucked against his paws, his fur slightly damp where the snow had melted but no longer shivering. A patch of frost clung to his ear, his chest rising and falling with slow, deep breaths. He hadn't left. Not during the long hours of wind, not when the garbage truck roared past at 3 a.m., not when she'd cried out softly in her sleep. He had stayed. Lina sat up slowly, her muscles stiff and sore. The cold hadn't spared her body, but she didn't complain. There was something sacred about mornings like this, mornings when you opened your eyes and realized you weren't alone anymore. Sunlight filtered through the gaps in the alley, soft and gray, reflecting off the snow-blanketed street like a shy apology. The storm had passed. The world looked clean, quiet, temporary. She turned to him and whispered, "Hey, you made it." The shepherd opened one eye, then the other. He looked at her without alarm. No growl, no fear. Just those deep, intelligent eyes studying her like she mattered. She smiled, just a little. Her lips cracked at the corners from the cold, but she didn't care. "I think we both made it," she said. The dog stretched slowly, a slight whimper escaping his throat. When he tried to rise, one of his back legs gave a subtle twitch. He limped just slightly as he stood and stepped forward, pawing at the concrete like testing the ground. Lina watched him carefully. The way he carried himself wasn't like the other strays she'd seen, skittish, head low, ready to bolt. There was something still in him, something trained, proud, a kind of muscle memory that hadn't completely faded, like a soldier who had forgotten his uniform but still marched in his bones. She stood, too, brushing the snow from her jeans. The cold rushed back into her limbs without the dog's body heat beside her, but she shook it off. When she took a few steps forward, he followed. Not rushed, not hesitant, just chose to. Lina turned, a little stunned. "You sure?" she asked quietly. The dog tilted his head. His ears, though tattered, perked slightly. "Okay," she whispered, heart fluttering. "Then I guess you need a name." She looked at him for a long moment, taking him in fully now that daylight softened the bruises of the night. His frame was broad, though thinner than it should have been. His left ear had a tear. One of his hind legs moved stiffly. There were old scars hidden beneath the matted fur, some that didn't look like they came from street fights. But his eyes were ancient. They held storms and silence, pain and patience. 1,000 stories she might never know. And yet he had chosen to stay. She thought of the myths her mother used to read aloud at night, before sickness and bills and hunger had replaced bedtime. Stories of gods and monsters, maps of stars, names that meant something. "Atlas," she said softly. The dog blinked once, then sat beside her. Lina knelt, reached out gently, and touched the side of his face. "You look like you've carried the world," she whispered. "But you don't have to carry it alone now." The city murmured awake behind them, buses groaning to life, footsteps echoing down sidewalks, horns in the distance. But for a moment, it all fell away. It was just a girl and her dog, standing in the pale light of a new day. He limped forward and nudged her hand with his nose. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Lina laughed. It wasn't loud, it wasn't full, but it was real. "All right, Atlas," she said. "Let's see if the world's got anything left for us today." She adjusted the blanket over her shoulders, held her head a little higher, and stepped out of the alley. Atlas followed, not because of a leash, not because of fear, because of something better, something beginning. The subway tunnel swallowed most sound. Not in silence, no. Never truly silent in the city, but in layers, footsteps, overhead screeches of metal on metal, the distant thunder of arriving trains, garbled announcements no one listened to anymore. Echoes lived here. Echoes and people who didn't want to be seen. Lina sat near the base of a graffitied column, back pressed against the cold tile. Her hands, reddened from the morning air, curled into her lap. Next to her lay a small cardboard sign, scrawled with barely legible marker. "Just trying to eat. Thank you." Atlas sat beside her, upright, watchful. He didn't lie down like other strays she'd seen in the tunnels. He didn't look defeated. Instead, he sat tall, eyes scanning the foot traffic as if guarding something valuable, though all they had was a tattered backpack and each other. People passed in waves. Some glanced, most didn't. A few slowed, maybe recognizing the unusual sight. A homeless girl beside a noble-looking German shepherd, both too still, too alert, too unfitting for the grime around them. Lina shifted her weight, the ache in her knees growing sharp. Hunger had sharpened all her senses. She could smell the bagel shop near the stairwell above, hear the clink of coins in other people's pockets. She could feel Atlas's shoulder brushing hers now and then, as if reminding her, "I'm here." Her gaze dropped to the bucket lid in front of her. Empty. She let out a quiet breath and looked up at the ceiling. It was time. "I haven't done this in a while," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to him. Atlas responded with a small, curious tilt of his head, encouraging. Or maybe just curious. Lina glanced around. No one seemed to be paying much attention anymore, so she closed her eyes and began to sing. It wasn't loud, it wasn't perfect. Her voice cracked in places, roughened by cold and exhaustion. But it carried something raw, something that threaded its way through the artificial sounds of the subway like a ripple in water. She didn't sing for applause or pity. She sang for the girl she used to be, for the mother who used to hum the same melody while folding clothes in their old apartment, for the nights before the clinic, before the state, before the streets. A lullaby, one the world had forgotten. But she remembered. Atlas didn't move. His ears stayed perked, his eyes alert, like her voice was the thing anchoring him in place. A few people turned their heads as they walked past. One, a man in a business coat, hesitated, looked at Atlas, then at Lina. His eyes softened for a second before he fished in his pocket and dropped 2 quarters into the plastic lid. They hit with a small clink. Lina's voice wavered, but she didn't stop. Atlas's tail thumped once against the floor. It was the beginning. Soon another person slowed, a woman with a stroller. She didn't drop money, but she smiled, a real one, like Lina was human again. Another coin. Then another. Not many. Not enough to buy a meal, but enough to feel like the world had noticed. even just for a moment. Lina's voice softened into silence. The lullaby ended where it always had, with no resolve, no happy cadence, just a question lingering in the air. She looked down at the coins. $6 and change. Her throat was tight. Then Atlas moved, not far, just a few steps forward. He stopped beside the edge of the passing crowd and stood firm, his body square, his presence magnetic. A man walked too close. Atlas let out a soft bark. Not a growl, not a threat, just an announcement. "She's here." The man startled slightly, looked down, met the eyes of the German shepherd, then at Lina, and dropped a $5 bill into the lid. Atlas returned to her side. Lina blinked fast. "Did you just—" She didn't finish the sentence. Atlas licked his lips, sat back down, and resumed his silent watch. More coins followed. A crumpled dollar, a protein bar, a nod from a tired nurse walking home after a night shift. A stranger's coffee and a paper cup left on the ground without a word. And the thing that surprised her most wasn't the generosity. It was the dignity. People didn't just look at her and turn away. They looked and stayed, all because of him. She leaned over and whispered, "You're magic, Atlas." His tail thumped once more. By the time the overhead lights began to flicker warning of a train's approach, she had nearly $10 and the half-promise of a meal. It wasn't a miracle, but it was enough to feel real, enough to remember that she still had something to offer. Her voice, her loyalty, and the quiet presence of a dog who had chosen her back. Outside the subway station, the city throbbed with a rhythm Lina had long stopped trying to match. People rushed past her like wind, all motion and purpose, faces angled downward, eyes avoiding contact. The snow had softened the sidewalks, but not the hearts. The cold didn't just live in the air. It clung to people's shoulders, made them move faster, speak less, notice nothing. Lina stood near the station entrance, stuffing the collected coins and bills from earlier into the front pocket of her hoodie. Atlas stayed close, body brushing her knee as if tethered by something deeper than a leash. They hadn't spoken. Well, she had, but mostly to fill silence. But the bond between them had thickened over the course of the morning, like something invisible but strong had stitched them closer with every step. "I think we've earned a sandwich today," she whispered, the sound barely louder than the passing cars. Atlas didn't wag his tail, but his ears twitched at her voice. His body remained alert. Not anxious, just watchful. She turned, about to head toward the corner bodega, when Atlas suddenly stopped. His muscles tightened, not rigid, but engaged. Lina paused. "What is it?" she asked softly, following his gaze. But he wasn't looking at the food cart or the garbage bins. He was looking across the street, at a figure, a woman, standing still beneath the overhang of a small bookstore, dressed in a long camel-colored coat with soft gloves and leather boots. Her silver hair was pinned back loosely, and though her age showed in the gentle folds around her mouth and the fine lines etched near her eyes, there was something commanding about her presence, something still. She wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't rushing like the others. She wasn't passing by. She was watching, right at them, more precisely, at Atlas. The woman didn't flinch when their eyes met. In fact, she seemed to lean in slightly, as if confirming something from afar. Her hands were clasped before her, not in worry, not in fear, in recognition. Lina squinted, instinctively stepping half a step in front of Atlas, not to protect him, but to draw attention off him. Her pulse quickened. She knew that kind of attention, that stillness in someone's body that meant they weren't here by accident. But she didn't say anything. Neither did the woman. A delivery truck passed between them, blocking the view for a split second. When it cleared, she was gone. Lina turned her head sharply, scanning the sidewalk, the bookstore doorway, the building entrances. Nothing. No flash of that coat, no silver hair. Just the city again. Cold and loud. But Atlas remained frozen, still staring at where the woman had stood. "Did you know her?" Lina asked under her breath, kneeling beside him. He didn't move, but his breathing had changed, slower, focused. A subtle shift, but Lina felt it. His body was remembering something, some instinct she couldn't read. Then he looked at her. And for a second, Lina felt it too. Not fear, but something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time. Anticipation. Like the air had shifted just slightly. Like the day was bending in a new direction. Still uncertain. But no longer random. She rose slowly, brushing off the salt and slush from her knees, and looked once more across the street. Nothing. Still the feeling lingered. That someone had seen them, not as a problem to ignore, not as a curiosity to pity, but as something more. And that maybe, just maybe, they weren't invisible anymore. "Come on, Atlas," she said, touching the top of his head. "Let's get that sandwich." He finally moved, nudging her hand with his nose. But even as they turned the corner, his ears stayed alert, head flicking back once, watching the spot where the woman had stood, as if something had just begun. The alley near Wabash and 14th looked empty at first glance, just another forgotten crease in the city's spine, lined with rusted dumpsters and broken glass. But Lina knew better. Every corner had a story. Every crack in the sidewalk had a name written in rules no one said out loud. And this one? This one wasn't hers. She kept her steps quiet, eyes forward, but aware. Atlas walked slightly behind her now, not leashed, but shadowing her with quiet purpose. His paw steps made no sound on the wet pavement. Every few seconds he glanced at her, and then scanned the surrounding area like he'd done it 100 times before. They had circled 3 blocks looking for a safe spot to sit. Not too visible, not too dark, not near the soup lines too crowded, not by the church too many older men. And Lina had learned the hard way not to trust the ones who offered help too quickly. She spotted a patch of concrete near a boarded-up florist shop, a dry stoop, not much foot traffic, out of the wind. But she wasn't the only one who had noticed it. 3 kids were already there. Teenagers, maybe a few years older than Lina, dressed in hoodies, stiff from wear, and lined with grease and rain. They sat in a triangle, huddled around a small bag of half-eaten fries, faces gaunt, eyes sharp from too many nights like hers. One of them spotted her as she approached. A tall boy with narrow shoulders and a buzzed head. He stood slowly, chewing as he spoke. "You lost, Shorty?" Lina didn't answer. She just stopped a few feet away, hands in her pockets. Buzzcut stepped forward. "You don't look familiar. That corner's taken." She shrugged. "Didn't see your name on it." Wrong answer. The smallest of the 3, a girl with eyes like broken glass, snorted. "We don't write it. We earn it." Buzzcut stepped in closer, his chin lifting. He wasn't big, but he was confident. That meant something out here. He eyed Atlas. "Dog's clean," he muttered. "Where'd you get him?" "I didn't," Lina said. "He found me." Buzzcut scoffed. "Bet I can make him find someone else." He reached into his coat like he was going to pull something. Maybe a broken bottle, maybe just bluffing. He didn't get the chance. Atlas stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. His growl wasn't loud, but it changed the air, low, deep, controlled. Not a threat made in panic, but a promise. His body didn't lunge, didn't flinch. He simply placed himself between Lina and the boy, head low, eyes locked. And suddenly, no one was talking. Buzzcut froze. So did the girl. The third kid, the quiet one near the wall, whispered, "Don't mess with that one. That ain't no alley mutt." Atlas took one more step forward. His growl deepened, just a note, and the boy backed up fast. "Easy," Buzzcut muttered, raising his hands. "We were just talking." Atlas didn't blink. Lina reached out and touched the fur behind his neck. "It's okay," she said softly. Only then did he retreat, tail high but relaxed, returning to her side like a soldier obeying a command that was never spoken aloud. Buzzcut hesitated, then waved a hand toward the alley wall. "Take the stoop," he mumbled. "We were leaving anyway." He turned and walked off, the others following behind. None looked back. Lina didn't smile. She didn't watch them go. She just sat down on the cracked step and placed her backpack at her feet. Atlas curled beside her without a word. They sat in silence for a long while. Wind drifted past, stirring a scrap of newspaper across the concrete. Somewhere in the distance, a bottle shattered. Tires screeched. But here, in this stolen little space, Lina felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not power. Protection. She looked down at Atlas. He wasn't even panting, just watching. Just there. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. His ears twitched. She reached over and brushed her fingers gently over the fur at his shoulder. "But thank you." For a moment her throat tightened, not from fear, from something deeper, because for the first time the streets hadn't eaten her alive. Not because she was strong, but because she wasn't alone. The sandwich was cold by the time she unwrapped it, ham and cheese white bread, no condiments. It had come from a donation bin near the train yard. Someone had tossed it in a paper sack alongside a bruised apple and a bottle of water. Lina wasn't sure if the person meant it for her, but she'd taken it anyway. Out here, intentions didn't matter, only survival did. She sat on the concrete stoop behind the old florist's shop, legs pulled up beneath her, the sandwich resting in her lap. Atlas lay close, his head on his paws, eyes closed but ears twitching with every sound that drifted through the alley. The morning had been hard. She'd fought to hold her ground, fought to keep their spot, fought to not feel the gnawing guilt that came with having just a little more. And then she saw him. A kid, maybe 6, maybe 7, curled up near the dumpster across the alley. Just a hoodie and socks, no shoes, no blanket. His face was pale, sunken in that way that hunger carved into children faster than time ever could. He wasn't crying. He was too far past that. He just stared, not at her, at the sandwich. Lina froze. She could hear the growl of her own stomach, feel the ache in her ribs like fire, but the way the boy looked at the food made her forget her own pain for a beat. It wasn't just hunger in his eyes. It was something worse, resignation. She looked down at the sandwich, then at Atlas, then back at the boy, and she sighed. "I must be crazy," she murmured, half to herself, as she tore the sandwich in half. She stood, walked slowly over, and crouched beside him. "Hey," she said softly. The boy flinched, shoulders tightening like a stray expecting a blow, but he didn't run. Lina offered him the sandwich half. "It's not much, but it's warm." He stared at it. then at her. Then, hesitantly, he reached out with fingers so thin she could see the bones beneath the skin. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible. He bit into it like he hadn't eaten in days. Maybe he hadn't. Lina didn't ask. She just sat beside him, not close, just near enough. Atlas rose slowly from his spot and walked toward them. His movements were fluid, deliberate, not threatening. The boy's eyes widened as the dog approached. "He's okay," Lina said gently. "He doesn't bite." Atlas paused, then lay down beside the boy without making a sound. He didn't press against him, just positioned himself close enough for warmth. The boy looked at him, uncertain, then slowly leaned into the thick fur at Atlas's side. The dog didn't move. He just stayed, just like he had for her. The boy closed his eyes, still chewing. His shoulders lowered just a little, the kind of lowering that only happens when the body stops bracing for pain. Lina sat quietly, watching them. The boy, the dog, the strange image of softness in a place that had so little of it. She reached into the bag and pulled out the apple, tossing it lightly into her hand before offering it. "Want this too?" The boy blinked. "You sure?" "No," she said, cracking a wry smile, "but take it anyway." He did. They sat like that for a while, 3 souls against the world, none of them speaking much, but none of them moving away either. The wind softened. The snow had paused for now. In the distance, a bus hissed to a stop. Someone cursed near the street corner. The city went on. But in that moment, this alley didn't feel like a battleground. It felt almost kind. Lina looked at Atlas. He had his eyes closed again, but the corners of his mouth were relaxed. His chest moved in slow, even rhythm. His tail gave a single, silent thump. "You're a good boy," she whispered. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The boy finished the sandwich and curled closer to Atlas. He didn't ask for her name. She didn't ask for his. Out here, names weren't what connected people. Actions were. Lina leaned back against the wall, stomach still aching, but heart a little less empty. Sometimes, the most feral creatures were the only ones who knew how to share warmth. The sun had dipped behind the rooftops by the time Lina left the alley. Twilight turned the snow a shade of blue, and shadows stretched long between the buildings. Streetlights flickered to life one by one, their pale halos doing little to chase away the cold or the danger. Chicago after dark was a different creature, meaner, quieter, and always watching. Lina walked with one hand in her pocket, fingers curled tightly around the small stash of coins and crumpled bills she'd managed to collect that day. It wasn't much. Enough for a hot drink, maybe something warm from the corner market if she caught the clerk in a generous mood. Atlas walked beside her, his pace measured, his body close. Not just accompanying her, escorting her. His ears were high, tail low, his every step filled with quiet purpose, like he sensed something she didn't. She turned into the side street they sometimes used to reach the empty train yard where they'd sleep. It was quieter there, tucked behind a chain-link fence and an old boxcar no one checked anymore. Lina liked it because it felt hidden, forgotten, safe. But tonight, something felt off. She barely made it halfway down the block before a voice cut through the stillness like a blade. "Well, well, look who's got pockets today." She froze. 3 figures stepped out from behind a graffiti-tagged dumpster boys maybe a year or 2 older than her, dressed in layered hoodies and street-hardened eyes. The kind of boys who'd stopped playing long ago. One had a scar across his lip. Another twirled a broken bike chain around his fingers like a toy. Her heart thudded in her chest. "I don't want trouble," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice even. "I'm just walking." "Trouble?" the tall one with the chain echoed, grinning. "Nah, girl. We just want to talk." Atlas moved closer to her side, his body tense, head lowered slightly. A low growl rumbled in his chest, deep and rising. One of the boys laughed. "What's he gonna do? Bark us to death?" They moved in faster than Lina could back away. The one with the scar lunged forward, grabbing her arm. "Let go!" she shouted, twisting. Atlas exploded. The sound that came from him wasn't a bark. It was a snarl, primal and furious, the sound of instinct turned loose. In a flash, he lunged at the nearest boy, clamping his jaws onto the thick sleeve of his coat and dragging him down into the snow with the full weight of a soldier unleashed. The boy screamed, really screamed, as Atlas's teeth sank through fabric and into skin. "Get him off me!" someone yelled. The one with the chain stepped forward, and before Lina could stop it, swung a boot hard into Atlas's ribs. The impact echoed through the alley. Atlas yelped, a sharp, guttural sound Lina had never heard from him before. "No!" she screamed, rushing forward, but even stunned, even hurt, Atlas didn't let go. His stance held. His body, though trembling, still shielded her. The boy beneath him flailed until finally Atlas released, snarling as he backed up to stand in front of Lina, blood on his muzzle. The attackers didn't press again. They'd seen enough. "Freaking psycho dog!" the boy spat, clutching his torn arm. "You're lucky he didn't take your face." "Let's go," the tallest one growled, casting one last look at Atlas. "Not worth it." And just like that, they were gone. Their footsteps retreated down the alley, swallowed by the dark. Lina dropped to her knees beside Atlas. His sides heaved, his eyes still burned with alertness, but there was pain in the way he held himself now, subtle but unmistakable. She ran her hands gently along his body until she found it, his left side, just beneath the rib cage, already swelling from the kick. "Oh, God," she whispered. "You're hurt." Atlas whined low in his throat, but didn't pull away. She buried her face in his neck, her body trembling now as the shock set in. "You didn't have to. You could have run." But he hadn't. He'd stayed, fought, bled, for her. She held him tightly, her tears hot against his fur. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." They sat there in the dim orange glow of a flickering streetlight, surrounded by cracked pavement and discarded wrappers, the world moving on like nothing had happened. But everything had changed. She hadn't just found a dog. She had found a protector. And now, he needed her too. The tracks behind the old train station hadn't seen a working engine in years. Rust grew like moss along the rails, and the air always carried a faint metallic tang-like history, trying to breathe through snow. The station itself was nothing more than crumbling brick and broken windows now, its once grand archways left hollow, forgotten by time, abandoned by purpose. That's why Lina had chosen it. It was a place no one bothered to look, and tonight that was all she wanted. She crouched low inside the shell of a boxcar, its metal walls groaning softly in the wind. The ceiling above her had a wide crack, letting snow drift in quiet flakes across the floor. She and Atlas lay curled in the corner, her back against the wall, his body tight against hers. He hadn't moved much since the attack. The swelling near his ribs had grown, warm to the touch. Every breath he took came with effort now, a slow, careful inhale followed by a faint shiver. But he never whined, never whimpered. He simply pressed his muzzle into the crook of her elbow and stayed. "Hang on," Lina whispered, brushing snow from his ear. "Just a little longer, okay?" She didn't know who she was talking to him, herself, or the universe. Maybe all of them. The weight of the day was settling into her bones. Fear, fatigue, helplessness. She had nothing left. No more food, no painkillers, no plan. And that terrified her more than anything. Because Atlas had fought for her, and now she didn't know how to fight for him. She leaned her forehead against his, eyes closed. "Please don't leave me." The snow fell harder outside. Wind curled through the train car's cracks like fingers, tugging at the edges of the blanket she'd tried to shield him with. Then, footsteps, soft, measured, unhurried. Lina's eyes snapped open, her breath hitched. Someone was coming. She tensed, pulling herself in front of Atlas instinctively. Her fingers closed around a jagged piece of metal she'd kept hidden near her side, more rust than weapon, but it gave her the illusion of defense. The footsteps stopped just outside the car. Then a voice calm, low, and female. "I'm going to come closer now." Lina didn't move. Her heart pounded like a drum in her ears. The figure stepped into view. An older woman, tall, wrapped in a tan wool coat buttoned to the throat. Her silver hair was braided loosely over one shoulder, face half lit by the moonlight slanting through the broken roof. She carried no umbrella, no purse, just a pair of soft gloves and something steadier than confidence. She didn't look like a cop, didn't look like the outreach workers who sometimes handed out sandwiches with forced smiles. She looked like someone who knew, but knew what? Lina narrowed her eyes. "What do you want?" The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked past Lina, to Atlas. Her entire posture changed, not softer, but focused. She took one more step, then slowly lowered herself to her knees on the damp concrete. The snow dusted her shoulders. She didn't flinch. "Hey there," she said gently, eyes still on him. "You've had a rough night, haven't you?" Lina tensed. She waited for the growl, the stiffening, the defensive snarl, but it didn't come. Atlas stirred barely. His eyes fluttered open. He lifted his head just an inch enough to see her, then he laid it back down. Quiet. Calm. Accepting. The woman smiled faintly. "You still remember how to read people, don't you, boy?" Lina's throat tightened. "Why are you here?" she demanded, voice brittle. The woman turned to her now, not intruding, not pleading, just present. "I saw you sing," she said, "a few days ago, outside the subway station. I saw him too." Lina's stomach knotted. "You were watching us?" "I was listening." The woman reached slowly into her coat pocket. Lina flinched, but she only pulled out a folded towel. She laid it across her lap before gesturing gently. "I don't want anything from you. I just want to help him." Lina looked at Atlas. His eyes were on her now, heavy but still clear, still trusting. It made the decision harder. "He doesn't trust people," Lina whispered. The woman nodded. "Then I'm lucky he doesn't see me as one." A pause. Then, without breaking eye contact, she added softly, "May I touch him?" Lina hesitated, then nodded once. The woman leaned forward, placing one gloved hand gently against Atlas's neck. Her fingers moved slowly, reading him like braille along his spine, down to the ribs. Her expression shifted. Concern, recognition. She pulled back and looked at Lina. He's in pain, but he's holding steady. If we don't move him soon, the swelling could worsen." Lina swallowed. "I don't have anywhere to take him." "You do now." The woman reached into her other pocket and held out a small card. "Dr. Evelyn Harper, K9, Rehabilitation and Rescue Veterinarian. Return." Lina stared, then looked back at Atlas. He blinked slow and steady, and for the first time since the attack, he exhaled, not from effort, but relief. Lina didn't take the card right away. She stared at it like it might burn her fingers. Clean, white, official-looking, in a way that didn't belong in a train yard at midnight. The ink didn't smudge. The corners weren't bent. It was too neat, too perfect, too dangerous. Evelyn held it steady, no pressure in her posture, just quiet patience. The wind picked up and flurried snow around them, sticking in her silver hair like frost on morning grass. But she didn't flinch, didn't withdraw her hand. Lina's voice cracked through the silence. "What do you want from us?" The woman didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at Atlas, still lying beside Lina, his breathing shallow, but calmer than before. One paw stretched protectively toward her boot. His eyes followed Evelyn without fear, but not blindly. He watched her the way soldiers watch the horizon. Evelyn exhaled slowly. "I want to make sure he lives through the week." "That's not what I meant," Lina said, her fingers tightening in the blanket wrapped around Atlas's ribs. "People don't offer help without expecting something. You don't know us." Evelyn's gaze drifted back to Lina. "No," she said softly. "But I recognize you." Lina flinched. "You don't know anything about me." "I didn't say I knew you. I said I recognized you." Evelyn's voice was calm, not kind in a syrupy way, but even, like someone who didn't need to raise it to be heard. "You sit like someone who's always listening, speak like someone used to being interrupted. And that dog, he watches you like you're the only thing that keeps him anchored." Lina looked down, jaw clenched. "He doesn't belong to anyone." "I never said he did." The silence stretched again, brittle like ice underfoot. Evelyn didn't move. "I worked with dogs for over 30 years, she said finally. K9 units, therapy programs, war survivors, trauma response. I trained them, rehabilitated them, buried more than I care to count." She paused. Her voice dipped just a little. "And then, one day, I lost one. A German shepherd. Same body type, same stance, same fire behind the eyes. He vanished without a trace. And I stopped looking." Lina lifted her eyes. "You think he's yours?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, I think he's yours." That caught Lina off guard. Her face flickered confusion, giving way to something closer to hurt. "Then why are you here?" Evelyn lowered the card a little, resting it gently on the edge of the crate beside them. She didn't force it, didn't insist. "I'm here because I saw you sing." Lina blinked. "In the subway. You sang like someone whose voice had been stolen and was finally asking for it back." She hadn't realized anyone had noticed. She barely remembered what she'd sung. But Evelyn wasn't finished. "I watched him stand beside you, alert, not afraid, not guarding out of habit, but out of choice." The woman's gaze softened. "I've seen soldiers guard their handlers. I've seen strays follow anyone who feeds them. But what I saw with you two that wasn't training, that was trust." Lina swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry. You still haven't answered my question. I'm not here to fix your life, Evelyn said plainly. I'm not a miracle, and I don't make promises I can't keep. She pulled off one glove and placed it beside the card. Her hand was lined with age but steady. What I am offering is something small, something quiet. She met Lina's eyes. A warm place to sleep, food that doesn't come from a trash bin, a vet who won't ask questions, and time to heal, time to think. Lina stared at her, the words pressing like weight against her chest. Warmth, food, time, words she'd stopped believing in. Atlas stirred beside her. A faint sound escaped his throat. Not pain this time, just awareness. He nudged his nose into Lina's hip like a signal, not urging, just waiting. The card lay between them, harmless and still. Lina didn't reach for it yet, but she didn't look away either. Evelyn rose to her feet, brushing snow from her coat. "I'll come back in an hour," she said, voice quiet but resolute. "With a van. If you're here, I'll drive you both to my clinic. No questions. No forms. No names if you don't want to give them." She looked down once more at Atlas, then Lina. "But if you're gone, I'll understand." She turned, her boots crunching softly over the snow as she walked away, vanishing into the dark the same way she'd appeared. Lina sat frozen for a long time, staring at the card, then down at Atlas. She brushed a hand over his ear gently. "What do you think, boy?" He didn't answer, but he didn't look away. Atlas's breathing had changed. It was subtle at first, his exhales slightly sharper, his body shifting more frequently, as though he couldn't get comfortable no matter how he curled. But Lina had learned to notice the small things. Life on the street taught you that the first signs were always the quietest. Now, every breath he took seemed to cost him something. His eyes fluttered open, glassy but searching. When he looked at her, it wasn't with panic, it was with trust, and that only made it worse. "Please," Lina whispered, her fingers buried deep in his fur. "Don't do this now." She glanced at the card Evelyn had left, its clean white rectangle still untouched on the edge of the boxcar's floor. It might as well have been a live wire. Her heart hammered every time her eyes landed on it. She wanted to believe. She really did. But belief was a luxury. And out here, trust wasn't a gift. It was a gamble. Snow tapped gently on the rusted metal above, the sound rhythmic, cruelly calm. Outside, the sky had turned the color of bruised ash. Twilight leaned toward full night. Atlas whimpered. That was what did it. Not a loud sound, not a collapse. Just a small, involuntary release of pain that slipped from his throat like a secret he didn't mean to tell. Lina stood so fast she startled herself. Her fingers shook as she pulled the blanket tighter around him, then stuffed what little they had into her backpack. Half a water bottle. A threadbare scarf. Coins useless now. She crouched beside him, face inches from his. "We're going to try, okay? Just this once." She slid the card into her pocket. When the headlights appeared down the alley an hour later, just like Evelyn had promised, Lina didn't run. She stepped out into the snow, her arms wrapped around herself, eyes locked on the slow-approaching van. It was older, a little scratched, but clean. No markings, no police decals, just a solid dark blue with a faint hum and steady wheels. It stopped a few feet away. The driver's door opened, and Evelyn stepped out. No smile, no dramatics, just a nod, soft and brief. "I brought blankets," she said gently. "And help, if you want it." Lina hesitated, then turned back into the train car, where Atlas lay half-curled, still breathing, but barely. She knelt beside him. "I'm going to lift you, okay? We're going somewhere better." He didn't move, didn't resist. When she slid her arms beneath him, he let out a soft grunt, but didn't fight it. That nearly broke her. Evelyn appeared beside her. "Let me help." Lina flinched, but then nodded. Together, they lifted the dog out of the boxcar, Evelyn surprisingly strong for her age. Lina never once let go of his front paw. The moment the van door closed behind them, the change was instant. Warmth. It poured in like a flood through the heater vents, through the soft upholstery, through the clean scent of cotton and antiseptic. Lina sat stiffly, not daring to relax, her body curled protectively around Atlas as he lay stretched across the back seat, head resting in her lap. The engine rumbled beneath them. Evelyn didn't say much as she drove. The snow fell harder now, blanketing the windshield in waves, but the wipers sliced through it like practiced hands. The radio was off. The silence wasn't awkward, it was measured, respectful. Lina looked out the window once. The city passed by. Not quickly, not urgently, just fading. They passed the train yard, the back streets, the flickering diner where she used to beg behind the kitchen door, and then they passed the spot, the alley where she first saw Atlas, curled up in the cold. She stared. The garbage bin was still there, but it looked smaller now, less threatening, like the past had shrunk the moment she stepped into the van. She turned back to him. Atlas was still breathing, but his body trembled under the blanket Evelyn had tucked over him. Lina pressed her hand gently to his chest. "I don't know if this is the right choice," she whispered. He didn't open his eyes, but he nudged her wrist with his nose, faint but deliberate. And that was his answer. Evelyn glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. There's a vet on standby." Lina didn't respond, but she leaned down, her cheek resting lightly against Atlas's ear. "We're not running anymore," she murmured. "Just this once. We're staying." And outside, the city disappeared into snow. The van turned off the main road and onto a narrow gravel path flanked by trees dusted with snow. Lina sat motionless in the back seat, her arms curled protectively around Atlas's still body. He was breathing, but every rise and fall of his chest felt thinner than the last, like his lungs were borrowing strength from her hand pressed over his ribs. The headlights illuminated a wooden sign just ahead, barely visible in the snowfall. Wind Haven. Rehabilitation and Canine Sanctuary. The word sanctuary landed in her chest like a language she almost understood, a word she wanted to believe in but had never dared speak aloud. They rounded one last bend, and there it was. A large two-story house stood at the top of a small, hill-weathered stone wrapped in ivy gone brown for winter. The roofline was steep and dotted with dormer windows glowing soft yellow from within. A wide wraparound porch cradled the front of the house, and beyond it, across a wide fenced field, a long stable-like structure sat under floodlights, flanked by kennels and runways. No city noise, no sirens, no shouting, just the crunch of tires over snow. The van came to a stop. Evelyn killed the engine and turned to face her. "We're here." Lina didn't move. Couldn't. She wasn't used to arriving anywhere. But then the side door slid open, and warmth hit her like a wave. Not just heated air, but a kind of stillness, thick and quiet, like the place itself had been waiting to exhale. A man in a worn Carhartt jacket stood by the steps. Mid-50s, soft-eyed, and holding a large veterinary kit. He didn't ask questions. He simply stepped forward with a gentle urgency as Evelyn helped Lina lift Atlas from the van. The old shepherd whimpered when they shifted his weight, but he didn't resist. He trusted her, even now. The man introduced himself only as Doc Harris and nodded toward the side door of the house. "We've got a clean room prepped. No noise. Heated floor." Lina followed in a daze as they carried Atlas inside. The warmth of the entry hall hit her full force, radiators humming quietly, the faint scent of cedar and fresh soap. Everything was soft. The lighting, the wooden floors, the rhythm of footsteps on old rugs. She blinked against it, like her eyes didn't quite know how to see comfort anymore. They brought Atlas into a converted sunroom now lined with medical supplies and a thick bed of clean blankets. Doc Harris moved with calm, practiced hands, inspecting the bruising along Atlas's ribs, checking vitals, murmuring things to Evelyn Lina couldn't quite follow. She stood frozen near the wall, backpack still on, her shoes leaving slush across the old rug. She didn't know where to go, didn't know what to do, so Evelyn came to her. "Come on," she said gently. "You need to warm up. I've got something for you upstairs." Lina hesitated, casting one last look at Atlas. He was still breathing. His ears flicked as if to say, "Go." She nodded slowly. Evelyn led her up a staircase that creaked in the way old houses always do, like the wood remembers everyone who's ever climbed it. The hallway at the top smelled faintly of lavender and wool. They stopped at a room near the end. The door opened to a small space with a twin bed tucked under the eave, quilts piled high, and a single lamp casting golden light onto the floorboards. The radiator in the corner clicked softly. There was a folded sweater on the bed, socks, a towel, a toothbrush. Lina didn't touch any of it. She stood just inside the doorway, waiting for the catch, the trap, the strings. Evelyn didn't push. She just rested a hand on the doorknob. "There's a bathroom just down the hall. Take your time. When you're ready, come back down. He'll be right where you left him." Then she left, closing the door with a softness that felt like kindness. Lina stared at the bed, at the sweater, at the lamp. Then slowly, mechanically, she peeled off her coat. Her fingers trembled. Her body shook, not from cold anymore, but from something deeper, something she'd buried under alley walls and rusted fences. She sat on the edge of the bed and didn't move for a long time. Eventually, exhaustion pulled her sideways. Her cheek hit the pillow. Her eyes burned. And for the first time in, God, she didn't know how long, she slept. Not in fear, not in defense, but because, for this moment at least, she was safe. Downstairs, Atlas lay curled beneath clean blankets as Doc Harris packed up his kit. The swelling would take time to go down. He'd limp for a few days, but he was stable. When Evelyn checked on him, he blinked slowly and let out a breath against her hand. "You brought her home," she whispered, brushing a hand over his shoulder. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel lost. The kettle clicked off with a soft pop. Evelyn poured the steaming water over the tea leaves with quiet precision, her movements practiced, reverent even. Outside, the snow had thickened into a steady drift, blanketing the fields beyond the window in white silence. The early morning light came soft through the lace curtains, dim but gentle, like the house itself refused to startle the day. Lina sat at the kitchen table, shoulders wrapped in a blanket Evelyn had offered without asking. Her damp hair clung to her cheekbones, and her palms rested flat on the mug in front of her, though she hadn't yet taken a sip. She had barely spoken since waking. But she hadn't tried to leave either. That, Evelyn knew, was its own kind of miracle. "I used to live out in the desert," Evelyn said quietly, taking the seat across from her. "New Mexico, high ground, open skies, wind so loud some nights you'd think God was trying to say something." Lina didn't answer, but she looked up. Evelyn smiled faintly. "Back then, I ran a facility for military dogs, those returned from service, or in transition between handlers. Some of the best souls I've ever known had 4 legs and didn't need words to tell you what they felt." She paused. "One of them was a shepherd. Big, proud, brilliant beyond measure. His name was Oso." Lina frowned. "Like bear?" "That's right, Spanish for bear. He used to press his weight into you like a bear hug whenever you knelt beside him. Had this little habit of bumping your knee with his nose if he thought you were lying about being okay." Evelyn's eyes softened, but there was a glint of something harder beneath. "He was more than just a K9. He was certified for explosives, tactical tracking, PTSD support, even worked a few urban rescues. Never failed a single drill. But more than that, he was loyal, fierce, and gentle, like he'd been born knowing the world was broken and just decided to love it anyway." Lina glanced toward the hallway, where Atlas was still resting under soft lights in the recovery room. "What happened to him?" she asked, her voice small. Evelyn's fingers traced the rim of her mug. "Someone took him." Lina blinked. 3 years ago, right before transfer to a new handler, a break-in at the facility. Cameras were disabled, kennels opened. They took 3 dogs. We recovered 2. She looked down. "Not him." Lina didn't speak, but her fingers curled tighter around her mug. Evelyn lifted her gaze again. "I saw Atlas clearly for the first time last night. After the vet sedated him for the swelling, I helped shave the matted fur along his side." She hesitated, then spoke slowly. "He has a scar behind his left shoulder, like a C shape. Surgical, not fresh." Lina's breath caught. "I thought it was from the fight," she murmured. "It's not," Evelyn said gently. "Oso had the same one. He got it after a shrapnel injury during a training accident on base. The tissue never grew back right." The room was suddenly too quiet, too still. Lina stared at her. "So, you think he's yours?" Evelyn held her gaze, but her voice was soft. "No. But I think he was mine," she said. "And now, he's yours." Lina blinked hard. "I'm not saying that because I have proof. I'm saying it because I've seen the way he looks at you, the way he moves when you're near. If he remembers me, it's only a shadow, a scent in the wind." She took a slow breath. "But you? You're his now. He's chosen. And dogs like him, once they do, they don't unchoose." Lina's throat tightened. "But why wouldn't you want him back? He was yours." Evelyn smiled, not sad, not forced, just full of quiet truth. "Because you saved him," she said. "Not me." She stood and crossed the room. From the side counter she picked up a faded collar, old leather, faded engraving. She placed it on the table. "I kept this," she said. "Not because I hoped I'd find him, but because I couldn't bring myself to forget." Lina reached out, fingers brushing over the letters. OSO 47931. The numbers meant nothing to her, but the weight of the collar did. Evelyn sat again, her voice lower now. "Scars tell stories. That's all they are. Sometimes we share them. Sometimes we pass them on. What matters is who we become after we get them. Lina looked down at her own hands cut, chapped, the small white crescent of a cigarette burn near her thumb from an alley she didn't want to remember. She looked toward the hall. Does he know? Evelyn followed her gaze. He knows you kept him alive. That's all he needs. A long pause stretched between them, and then, slowly, Lina reached out and pulled the collar close. Not to claim, not to return, but to remember. The room smelled like cedar wood and clean linens. Outside, the snow whispered against the windows in a steady hush, like the world had decided to hold its breath. The radiator clicked and hummed from the corner, wrapping the small upstairs room in gentle, unfamiliar warmth, the kind that didn't come from layering coats or body heat against brick walls, but from safety. Lina stood just inside the doorway, barefoot, in borrowed socks, wearing a too-big sweatshirt that smelled faintly of lavender. Her fingers clutched the hem at her waist as she looked at the bed neatly made, tucked tight, with a soft quilt folded down the middle and two pillows side by side. She didn't move for a long time. Beds were strange things now. She hadn't had one in over 3 years. What was once normal had become foreign, suspicious. Softness had always come with a catch, shelters with hidden curfews, couches that came with hands, cots where people snored and fought in their sleep. But this? It looked like it belonged to someone who didn't expect anything in return. From the hallway, she heard the soft thud of paws. Atlas appeared a moment later, slower than usual, but steady on his feet. His side was still bandaged beneath his fur, and his steps carried the memory of pain. But when he saw her, his ears perked gently. He crossed the threshold without hesitation and sat beside her, his shoulder brushing her leg. They stood that way in the stillness, two silhouettes against the quiet light. Then slowly, Lina walked forward and pulled back the covers. She slid under them, awkwardly at first, unsure if she was allowed to take up this much space, unsure if it would vanish the moment she closed her eyes. Atlas circled once, then twice, before curling down on the bed beside her, his body pressed lightly against hers. Not guarding, not posted at the door, not between her and the outside, but with her, like it was finally his turn to rest, too. Lina exhaled, the kind of breath she hadn't let herself take in years, the kind that emptied not just the lungs but the memory of cold nights and concrete floors and sleep broken by footsteps too close. She turned her face into the pillow and let it cradle her cheek. It was soft, absurdly soft. A tremor moved through her. She wasn't cold. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't watching. And neither was he. Atlas's head rested near her shoulder, eyes already closing, chest rising slow and even. His tail thumped once under the blanket, just once, and stilled. Lina reached for him, her hand finding the space between his ears. Her fingers moved gently, rhythmically, until her hand stilled too. She didn't know when sleep found her, only that this time it came without a fight. No tension in her jaw. No heart pounding against her ribs, no dream of alley walls closing in, no panic when a heater clicked on, no need to count exits in case someone came through the door. Just darkness, warm, quiet, and whole. And when the morning light slipped through the window hours later, soft as breath. Lina didn't flinch. She didn't wake choking or shivering or curled against a wall. She simply stirred, blinked at the light, and felt the weight of a warm dog still curled beside her. Atlas opened one eye. Lina smiled, groggy but real. You stayed. His tail gave the faintest wag beneath the blanket. No more alleys, she whispered, voice still thick with sleep. Promise. And in the soft hush of that quiet, safe room, their promise held. The snow had stopped by morning. The world outside Evelyn's estate glistened under the pale sun, each flake caught in the brittle branches like glass. Lina stood at the edge of the porch, the blanket still around her shoulders, watching her breath bloom in the cold air. Behind her, the house hummed with warmth, muffins baking, dogs yawning, soft radio static drifting from the kitchen. Atlas lay at her feet, chin resting on his paws, his eyes following the slow rise of daylight. His bandage had been changed. The bruising would take time to fade, but the pain was no longer sharp. Like her, he was no longer surviving. He was healing. The screen door creaked open behind them. "Come," Evelyn said gently. "I want to show you something." Lina followed. They walked the stone path that curved around the house toward the long barn she'd glimpsed from the van the night before. Up close, it looked nothing like the barns in the stories she'd been told as a kid. No hay bales, no pitchforks. Instead, clean lines, tall fencing, agility ramps, a circular training ring, and warmth spilling from the wide doors like invitation. Evelyn pushed them open. Inside was a different kind of world. Not loud, not chaotic, but alive. Children and teenagers moved through the space, some walking dogs on leads, others practicing basic commands, tossing toys, laying out obstacle courses. They weren't dressed in uniforms or calling roll calls, but there was something structured in their movements, something unspoken. Each one of them carried purpose. Lina stood still in the doorway, uncertain. She hadn't expected other kids. She hadn't expected any of this. Evelyn must have noticed. "Most of them are like you," she said. "Foster care, runaways, some from the system, some from nowhere at all." Lina swallowed. "And the dogs?" "Same story," Evelyn said simply. "Just in different bodies." They walked through slowly. The smell of wood shavings and peanut butter treats hung in the air, warm and oddly comforting. One teenage boy was helping an old chocolate lab navigate a maze of low hurdles. Another girl, maybe Lina's age, knelt beside a skittish Belgian Malinois, whispering calmly as she brushed out its fur. "Are they all trained?" Lina asked. "Some were K9s," Evelyn replied. "Some never got the chance. We don't rush them. We let them remember who they are." At the far end of the facility, a black shepherd with a silver muzzle trotted beside a girl wearing a knit beanie. The girl gave a single hand signal, and the dog dropped instantly into a downstay. No words, just connection. Lina watched in silence. "You don't have to do this," Evelyn said softly, reading her posture. "Not today, not tomorrow, but it's here." "I wouldn't know how." "No one does at first." Lina's hands slid into the pockets of her coat. "What if I mess it up?" Evelyn smiled. "That's part of the learning." They paused near a fenced run where a small group of younger kids were tossing tennis balls for a one-eyed golden retriever. The dog bounded awkwardly, tail flying, missing half the throws, but always coming back with pride. Atlas stood beside Lina, watching intently. One of the volunteers, a boy with a stutter, waved. "Want to join us?" Lina shook her head quickly. "I'm just watching." The boy nodded, no pressure. "Okay, watching's good too." He turned back to the dog, laughter echoing. Evelyn glanced at Lina. "This isn't school. No tests, no grades. Just space to try. And to be tried by something that won't give up on you." Lina looked up. "You're talking about the dogs." "I'm talking about both of you." Lina blinked hard and looked away. For a moment she just stood there, breathing in the sounds of a place that didn't ask her to prove anything, where bruises weren't questioned, where silence wasn't punished, where kids like her weren't stared at like a problem waiting to happen. Atlas let out a low huff beside her, nudging her calf with his nose. She reached down and scratched behind his ear. "I think he likes it here." "I think he's known this place longer than you have," Evelyn said. "He just forgot what it felt like to be safe." Lina looked around again, at the ramps, the tire jumps, the kids smiling for no one but the dogs in front of them. She didn't step forward. Not yet. But she didn't step back either, and that was enough. The mornings came earlier at Evelyn's sanctuary than they ever had on the street. Lina wasn't used to sunlight waking her instead of sirens, or the scent of brewing coffee instead of steaming dumpsters. But she didn't complain. She'd learned not to. Complaints were for people who had something to lose. She sat quietly at the edge of the bunk Evelyn had prepared for her clean sheets, a thick comforter, and a small heater that hummed like it had a heartbeat. Atlas was stretched out across the floor beside her bed, his ribs no longer sharp ridges, his breathing steady now. One of his ears twitched as a crow cawed in the tree just outside the window. They didn't need words. They never had. Downstairs the house had begun to stir. Footsteps on hardwood, distant barks, the clink of metal bowls, a new rhythm one Lina hadn't agreed to, but one she was being pulled into anyway. Evelyn didn't force her. She just handed her a clean hoodie and a pair of soft gloves at the breakfast table and said, "Whenever you're ready." That afternoon, Lina stood beside the kennels, broom in hand, staring down a row of open doors. Most of the dogs were out in the yard. She could still hear them barking faintly, yipping in bursts of play or argument beyond the wire fence. The kennels weren't dirty, not the way she'd expected. No filth, no neglect, just the smell of damp blankets, fur, and time. Still, she hesitated. Cleaning meant staying. Staying meant trusting. And trust was something she'd buried years ago, somewhere between her mother's last breath and her first night alone in the subway tunnels. Evelyn had said nothing of schedules or chores. She only handed her the broom and said, "Scout needs feeding, if you're willing." Scout. The name clung to her as she moved through the rows. And then she saw him. A golden retriever, older than any of the others, his coat dulled by time, eyes clouded with the milky sheen of blindness. He sat quietly in his enclosure, not pacing, not barking, just waiting. There was something about the way he held his head up-tilted slightly, as if listening, not with his ears, but with his memory. Lina stood outside his kennel for a long time. Atlas padded beside her, now steadier on his paws. He sniffed the air, tail flicking once, as if in greeting. Scout's nose twitched. Then his tail moved too slow at first, then with recognition. He walked toward the bars and stopped just short, sitting again, facing them even though he couldn't see. Lina crouched slowly, unsure. "Hey, boy," she whispered. "You hungry?" The dog tilted his head again, lips parting slightly as if the word meant something more than food. She stood and fetched the bowl from the supply room kibble soaked in warm broth, like Evelyn had shown her. Her fingers trembled slightly. She wasn't used to feeding anyone, not even herself most days. When she stepped inside Scout's kennel, he didn't move, just listened. She placed the bowl gently on the mat in front of him. He sniffed, then began to eat, carefully, without haste, like each bite was a ritual. Lina stayed in the corner, watching. Atlas sat at the threshold of the kennel, half in, half out, as if keeping watch. He didn't growl. He didn't intrude. Later that evening, she found herself rinsing water bowls, then replacing bedding, then sweeping out another stall without being asked. She told herself it was just for the dogs, not for Evelyn, not for the other kids she avoided eye contact with. Just for the animals because they didn't ask for anything and they never lied. But the truth was simpler than that. She wanted to be useful. And this was the first place that didn't punish her for trying. By the end of the week, a rhythm had formed. She didn't talk much. She didn't join the others for group sessions or card games in the common room, but she fed Scout every day, brushed the fur from his flanks, cleaned his eyes with gentle care. She didn't flinch when his nose nudged her elbow anymore. Sometimes when she sat beside his kennel and read aloud from the books Evelyn left by her bed, he would lie down with his head near her thigh, as if the sound of her voice was enough. Atlas grew stronger too. The limp faded. His coat regained its sheen. His gait became smooth, measured, confident. The scar along his shoulder remained, a reminder, but it no longer defined him. One morning, Evelyn watched from across the yard as Lina gave Atlas a silent command to sit. He obeyed instantly. No hesitation, no fear, just recognition. "I knew there was a soldier in him," Evelyn murmured, half to herself. But Lina didn't hear her. She was already kneeling beside Scout, fingers brushing through his tangled fur, whispering something only the old dog could understand. The late morning light slanted through the rafters of the old barn-turned-training hall, catching the particles of dust suspended mid-air like golden snowfall. Dogs barked distantly from the kennels outside, and the quiet hum of conversation rose among the gathered trainers and volunteers. Lina stood near the edge of the padded demonstration space, hands in her jacket pockets, trying not to draw attention to herself. Atlas sat by her side, alert, patient. Not rigid, but poised, like a violin string tuned tight, but not yet played. She hadn't meant to join the demo. She didn't even know one was happening until she followed the trail of boots and barking to the building Evelyn called the arena. A long, echoing space with agility bars, command cones, and scent trails mapped into sawdust and tape. Evelyn was already there, clipboard in hand, instructing a teenage girl with a Belgian Malinois on leash. The dog leapt through hoops on command, sniffed out a hidden pouch from a box of decoys, then returned to heel position with practiced grace. The volunteers clapped lightly. "That's Maxie," whispered a boy next to Lina. "Fast, but too hot. Can't stay still." Lina didn't answer. Atlas hadn't moved since they arrived. Evelyn turned, caught sight of her in the shadows. "Lina," she called gently, "would Atlas like a turn?" She froze. It wasn't a command. It never was, not with Evelyn. But it felt like a test all the same. And something about the way Atlas's ears perked made her nod before she even realized it. She unclipped the leash. He stood without needing to be told. The room went quiet. "Standard advanced K9 commands," Evelyn said, now speaking to the group. "No verbal cues unless necessary. Let's observe instinct and bond." Lina swallowed. Her heart thudded in her chest like it was trying to escape. "Stay," she whispered. Atlas did. She walked forward across the arena. 10 feet. 15. She turned, slowly raised her hand, a silent gesture, palm open, then downward. Down. He lowered himself, one paw at a time, his body aligned perfectly. There was a shift in the room. Some of the trainers straightened. One girl whispered, "Did she teach him that?" Evelyn said nothing, just watched. Lina exhaled and lifted her hand again, 2 fingers forward, arcing left. Crawl. Atlas moved low to the ground, fluid, never breaking eye contact with her. Dust clung to his fur, but he didn't stop until she signaled again. Sit. He obeyed. Then, on instinct, Lina said a word she hadn't even known she knew. Guard. Atlas's ears twitched. He stood in front of her, legs wide, eyes fixed on the perimeter of the room. The trainers went still. That's a military-grade protection command, one of them murmured. Atlas's stance was unshakable, protective, not aggressive, until Lina gently touched his side. He turned his head, looked at her, waited. She whispered, "At ease." And the big shepherd exhaled. His body softened. His tail wagged once. Silence lingered in the air like heat after lightning. Then Evelyn stepped forward. She knelt beside Atlas and reached out, fingers brushing the scar along his left flank. "Still a warrior," she said softly, "even when he doesn't have to be." Lina lowered her gaze, unsure if she should feel pride or fear. One of the trainers clapped, slow and stunned. The others followed. "Where did he come from?" someone asked. Lina looked down at Atlas. He looked up at her, eyes unreadable, but calm. She answered simply, "The street." But Evelyn watched him with a different kind of knowing in her eyes. Something old, something that carried weight. Later, as they walked back toward the house, Lina spoke without looking over. "Did I do something wrong?" Evelyn shook her head. "No, dear. You just showed us something true." They reached the porch. Lina paused and looked at the trees in the distance. Was he trained like that before? Evelyn's voice was quiet, almost reverent. It takes years to shape responses like that. Precision, discipline, and trust. He hasn't forgotten what he was. Lina looked down at Atlas. "I don't want him to have to be a soldier again." "He doesn't," Evelyn said. "But knowing how doesn't mean he has to be. It just means he can choose now." The words stayed with her long after the sun dipped behind the pines. That night, Atlas rested with his head on her knee, and for the first time she wondered who he had protected before and why the weight of his silence felt so familiar. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Somewhere outside, the wind nudged against the windows like a question without an answer. The room was dim, lit only by the dying glow of a small lamp on the dresser. Lina lay curled in the corner of the bed, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, like she could hold her bones together with sheer will. She twitched in her sleep. A whimper escaped her throat, then another. And then she cried out. Not a word, not even a name, just a sound. Raw, short, cracked in half. The kind of sound that doesn't come from the throat but from somewhere much older. Atlas was up in a second. He didn't bark, didn't make a sound, just moved. The German shepherd jumped from his spot by the foot of the bed, landing with the quiet grace of something that had been trained to read chaos in silence. He padded toward her, ears low, eyes wide, watching, waiting. Lina's chest heaved. "No, no," she gasped, caught between dream and memory. "Mama, please." "I said I'd come back." Tears streaked sideways down her face, soaking into the pillow. She didn't wake up, not fully, just twisted under the covers as if trying to outrun something already inside her. Atlas climbed onto the mattress, slowly, carefully, as if the mattress itself might collapse under the weight of grief. And then he did something he hadn't done since the night they first met. He rested his head gently on her chest, right over her heart. At first, Lina tensed, her breath hitched, then her fists unclenched. Her hands moved instinctively, like remembering how to swim, fingers tangling into the thick fur of his neck. She didn't open her eyes, just breathed him in. A new scent, clean wool, pine shampoo, warmth, and underneath that, the scent of the street, of places that don't have names but live in the bones. Her tears slowed, her shoulders sank, and for the first time in a long, long time, she spoke to someone who would never ask her for an explanation. "I lied to her," she whispered, voice hoarse. "I said I'd be back in time, but she was already gone." Atlas didn't move, just stayed there, still, anchored. "I wasn't enough," Lina murmured. "I wasn't fast enough." The wind outside groaned. Something metal creaked, a gutter, maybe. A memory. Lina clutched him tighter. "She died alone," she said. And that was it. The truth she'd never said out loud. The ghost that followed her through every streetlight shadow, through every quiet minute of every silent morning. "She died alone," she repeated, voice smaller. And Atlas, old soldier, forgotten sentinel, survivor of a past nobody asked about, pressed his head just a little harder into her chest. Not a command, not an answer, just presence. Just the act of staying. Her breathing slowed. Time passed like it used to when she was a little girl, tucked beside her mother in hospital chairs, where even pain became background noise to proximity. And finally, Lina opened her eyes. Just barely. The room had shifted. The air felt warmer, thicker somehow, as if the nightmare had let go. Her hand was still in Atlas's fur. "You okay?" she whispered, though the question wasn't really for him. His ears twitched. "You stayed," she said. And in that moment, half asleep, half broken, wholly held, Lina realized something she hadn't dared believe until now. She wasn't the only one haunted. He had ghosts, too. Maybe that's why he'd never left. Maybe that's why he couldn't. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and wet fur. The kind of place where silence hummed louder than conversation. Lina sat stiffly on a bench near the wall, clutching her coat sleeves like they might unravel her if she let go. Atlas lay beside her, one paw outstretched, the other tucked beneath his chest. His breathing was steady, but his eyes flicked toward the door every time it creaked. Dr. Myers, the on-site vet Evelyn trusted, was prepping the scanner across the room. He had the careful, practiced hands of someone who'd spent decades holding broken things together. "We're just going to check for a chip," he said gently, addressing Lina as if speaking to both of them. "Might tell us a little about his past." Lina didn't answer. Her fingers knotted tighter. She hadn't wanted this. Not really. But Evelyn had suggested it might help. Knowing where he came from doesn't mean you lose him. It just means you understand what he's carried. Atlas didn't resist when Dr. Myers approached. He didn't flinch, didn't growl. He simply tilted his head slightly, exposing the patch of fur beneath his left shoulder. The scanner gave a soft beep, then another. Dr. Myers froze. "That's unusual." Lina stood. "What is it?" He looked at her, expression unreadable. "He's chipped, but it's a military ID." Her stomach dropped. Military? He nodded slowly. Let me pull the data. Atlas stayed still, but his ears pinned slightly, like some distant memory was stirring under the surface of his skin. The room felt smaller suddenly, tighter. A minute passed, then two. Finally, Dr. Myers turned around, tablet in hand. K9 designation number 573, he said softly. Name listed as Oso, assigned to a military base overseas, deployed in conflict zones. Last recorded handler was Lieutenant Samuel Briggs. Lina blinked. And? Dr. Myers hesitated. Status? Declared lost in transit 4 years ago. She swallowed hard. Lost? Not deceased, not discharged, just disappeared. The word hung in the air like smoke. Atlas hadn't moved, but Lina had. She knelt beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder right over the scar. He didn't react, didn't pull away. Is that what you were? She whispered. Just lost? Dr. Myers cleared his throat. I can send this to Evelyn, but it's your call what to do with the information. She nodded numbly. After the vet stepped out, the quiet fell like snow, soft, heavy, impossible to ignore. Lina's thoughts spiraled. Images she'd never seen, only guessed, flashed through her mind. Atlas in uniform, beside soldiers, dust in the air, gunfire echoing in the distance. A command barked in another language, the sound of a helicopter, the emptiness that follows silence. She looked at him, truly looked. This wasn't just a stray. This was a dog who had known war, who had been trained to run toward gunfire and not away. And yet, when he was left behind, he hadn't fought to return to the front lines. He had curled under stairwells, starved in alleyways, waited in snowbanks for someone to see him as more than a number. Her hand slid down to his chest, feeling the slow thump of his heart. You don't have to be him anymore, she whispered. Not Oso, not 573. His head turned just slightly, eyes meeting hers. There was something ancient in them. Not old like time, old like ache. She swallowed the lump in her throat. You're Atlas, she said softly, because you carried too much for too long. The wind outside pushed against the windows, but inside there was stillness. He licked her hand, and for the first time she understood. He remembered everything, not in words, not in maps or timelines, but in muscle, in reflex, in scars. He remembered being left, but more importantly, he remembered being found. That evening, the fireplace in Evelyn's den whispered in soft, crackling rhythms. Lina sat curled on the floor beside Atlas, her knees hugged to her chest, the weight of the vet's words still pressing like snow on her ribs. She stared into the fire, eyes glassy. The flames licked the air like tongues of memory unspoken, uninvited. Across the room, Evelyn sat in her leather armchair, glasses perched on her nose, reading a yellowed letter from the file the vet had sent over. She'd been quiet since they returned from the clinic, giving Lina space, but not distance. Atlas lay between them on a thick blanket, bandaged leg tucked beneath him. He wasn't sleeping, just watching, always watching. Lina finally broke the silence. Did you know him? Evelyn looked up. Oso? She nodded. I never met him, but I knew of him, Evelyn said. Her voice was softer than usual, like a teacher explaining history to a child who already bore too much of it. He was a legend, passed every trial. Ran recon in Kandahar, located wounded in pitch-black desert nights. Soldiers said he could smell heartbreak. Lina let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but it wasn't joy. And then he vanished. Evelyn nodded. They searched, briefly, but K9s are considered equipment after a point. If you're not valuable anymore, you're just lost line item 23B. Lina's fingers curled tighter around her sleeves. He's not equipment, she said quietly. No, Evelyn agreed. He's not. There was a long silence. The fire cracked again. Atlas shifted slightly, exhaling through his nose like a sigh made of old memories. Lina leaned down until her forehead touched the top of his head. His fur was rougher now, less matted, but still wild, still real. I saw it, she whispered. When the vet said 573, when he said Oso, he didn't flinch, but something in him closed, like he remembered not as a name but a number. She looked at Evelyn. Her voice was steadier now. I'm not calling him that. Evelyn said nothing, only waited. Lina reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled scrap of paper, edges frayed from being folded and unfolded too many times. On it, in her tiny scrawl, were names she'd thought about before. Names from books, from old memories, from whispered dreams under subway stairs. I tried, she said, tried to think of what fit. But every name I found, it just sounded like something someone gave away. She turned her gaze back to the dog lying beside her. He looked up now, ears low but eyes steady. You didn't get to choose yours either, she murmured. Her hand rested on his neck, right where the scar ended. But you're not Oso, not a number, not their legend, not their ghost. She took a breath, then said it, not loud, not soft, just sure. You're Atlas. Evelyn tilted her head slightly. Why that name? Lina looked up. The firelight danced in her eyes, but there was no flicker in her tone. Because he carried too much, she said, and they never let him put it down. Atlas blinked slowly. Then, without hesitation, he leaned into her hand, like the name had always been there, just waiting to be spoken by someone who saw him. Evelyn smiled faintly. That's a good name. Lina smiled back, but it was thin, fragile, like something still healing beneath the surface. I don't know if I'm enough to give him a new story, she admitted. You don't have to, Evelyn replied. You just have to let him rest from the old one. For the first time since the truth was revealed, Lina exhaled fully. Atlas rolled to his side, exposing his belly unguarded. She laughed quietly. Guess he agrees. Evelyn rose, gently placed a hand on Lina's shoulder, and stepped away, leaving them with the fire, the quiet, and a name no longer tied to duty, but to freedom. That night, long after the house had gone still, Lina whispered to the ceiling above her bed, They gave you orders. I'm giving you peace. And downstairs, curled at her door, Atlas slept without dreaming. The footage wasn't meant to go viral. A grainy clip, Lina trudging through snow, Atlas at her side, finding a lost child. By morning, it had 20,000 shares. By night, reporters swarmed Evelyn's facility. Inside, Lina sat frozen, Atlas pressed to her side. Evelyn lowered the blinds. You don't have to say anything. The next day, a truck arrived. Out stepped Sergeant Bill Harlow. His name's not Atlas, he said softly. It's Ghost. Bill spoke of their bond lost during a mission, declared MIA. I thought he was gone. Lina said quietly. He's Atlas now. And he chose me. Bill nodded. I see it. He never looked at me like that. That night, Lina read Bill's letters. Memories of a dog who guarded, endured, and believed. The last letter. If he chooses you, never doubt you've been chosen. She curled beside Atlas. Thank you for surviving long enough to find me. Weeks later, Lina and Atlas passed their first field test, finding a hidden volunteer child. Evelyn smiled. That's the real test you both remembered who you are. Then came a real call. A missing boy near a river. Lina whispered, Atlas will find him. Atlas tracked, steady and sure. They found the boy shivering at the river's edge. Atlas moved close. The boy clung to him. As medics took him, Lina saw the boy's grip on Atlas's fur. A silent thank you. Then another call, a girl lost in the storm. Atlas led Lina through freezing woods to a fallen tree. The girl gripped his fur, leaning into him for warmth. By the time help arrived, she hadn't let go. Later, Lina sat beside Atlas. Every time I think you've done enough, she whispered, you do more. Atlas stayed close. The storm wasn't over, but neither were they. The footage wasn't meant to go viral, just a grainy clip of a teenage girl, Lina, trudging through snow with a German shepherd. Atlas nuzzled a half-frozen child. The child clung to him like a lifeline. By morning it had 20,000 shares. By nightfall, cameras and reporters swarmed Evelyn's facility. Inside, Lina sat frozen, a banana in one hand, the other on Atlas. He hadn't left her side. Evelyn lowered the blinds. You don't have to say anything. Lina nodded, heart pounding. The next day, a battered truck arrived. The man who stepped out wore a sheriff's jacket and heavy eyes. He removed his cap, staring at Atlas. His name's not Atlas, he murmured. It's Ghost. Sergeant Bill Harlow had served with him overseas. Ghost went missing during an ambush. Declared MIA. I never believed he died. Inside, over coffee, Bill shared memories. Ghost never barked unless it mattered. He'd been Bill's shadow. Lina quietly said, He's not a shadow anymore. He's Atlas, and he chose me. Later, reporters broke through the fence. Evelyn stood firm. No interviews without Lina's consent. Inside, Atlas stood between Lina and the chaos. To her, he wasn't Ghost. He was Atlas, the one who carried the weight of the world and chose to stay. Bill visited again, wrestling with the past. I don't want to take him, I just don't know how to let go. Lina said gently, You didn't fail him. You just weren't the end of his story. Before he left, Bill admitted, He never looked at me like he looks at you. Evelyn added, Maybe that's what both of you needed, to find out who you are apart. That night, Lina found a bundle of old letters Bill left for her. May 7th, Kandahar Province. He stood in front of me while bullets flew. I yelled for him to retreat. He wouldn't. He decided I was worth dying for. August 19th. He remembers. After each blast, he checks the camp. No ceremony to his grief, just purpose. No date. He touches my boot when I sleep, proof I'm still breathing. Short note, I think he dreams. Maybe of when someone gave up on him. That's what hurts most. Final letter. If he chooses you, never doubt you've been chosen. Lina's tears were quiet. but steady. She crossed to Atlas, curled beside him, and whispered, "Thank you for surviving long enough to find me." Atlas sighed, peaceful. The past no longer chased them. It lived with them now. The sun climbed slowly above the treetops, brushing golden warmth across the open field behind Evelyn's estate. A white canvas tent fluttered gently at the edges, and folding chairs had been arranged in neat rows beneath its shade. It wasn't much, not grand or loud, but it was more ceremony than Lina had ever known. She stood at the edge of the training yard, hands smoothing the borrowed shirt Evelyn had found her weeks ago. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of pride. Atlas sat beside her, his coat glistening in the morning light, a bright blue ribbon tied neatly around his neck. He hated the ribbon. She knew that. But he wore it anyway. And maybe that was the point. One by one, names were called. Teenagers stepped forward to accept their certificates, some with trembling hands, others with practiced confidence. Their dogs flanked them proudly. A wiry mutt named Birch, a retriever named Nova, a three-legged Malinois who had learned to search through rubble like it was instinct. Then Evelyn stepped forward. She didn't use a microphone. She didn't need to. Her voice carried because it always had not in volume, but in meaning. "We don't hand out medals here," she said, "because bravery isn't loud. It doesn't need a spotlight. It walks quietly beside us, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes on 4. She turned her gaze toward Lina. "And sometimes it takes a child the world forgot to remind us why we rescue at all." Lina's feet moved before her mind caught up. She felt her cheeks flush as she stepped into the open space, Atlas rising and following without command. No leash, no hesitation. The moment was still. Evelyn extended the certificate with both hands. "Lina Brooks," she said softly. "Certified in search, companion integration, and trauma response." The applause came gently, hands clapping in rhythm, not thunderous but real. Lina took the paper and held it like something sacred. When she turned, she caught a glimpse of the others watching. Some of the younger ones who'd arrived recently were sitting in the grass, wide-eyed. A girl no older than 9 had been hugging a battered stuffed animal the whole time. And suddenly, it clicked. She wasn't just graduating, she was becoming something for someone else. That afternoon, Evelyn found her sitting beneath the old sycamore near the south paddock, Atlas sprawled lazily at her feet, finally free of the ribbon. "Want to hear a secret?" Evelyn said, settling beside her with 2 steaming mugs of cocoa. Lina glanced sideways. "You don't seem like the secret-telling type." Evelyn smiled. "Today was never about a piece of paper. It was about a door. And what happens when you finally walk through it?" Lina traced her finger along the edge of the certificate in her lap. "I didn't think I'd make it this far." "I did," Evelyn said simply. "So did he." Atlas thumped his tail once, as if confirming the statement. "I want to help," Lina said after a pause, "with the new kids. The ones who flinch when you offer them kindness. The ones who only eat when the lights are off." Evelyn handed her an envelope. Inside was a schedule, part-time hours, a stipend, and one line in bold at the bottom, "Handler in training, Youth Support Division." Lina's throat tightened. "You mean it?" "I don't hand jobs out like candy, kid," Evelyn said. "You earned it. Every blister, every tear, every time you stayed when running would have been easier." Lina folded the paper carefully and leaned her head back against the tree. For the first time in years, the weight on her chest didn't feel suffocating. It felt like responsibility. It felt like becoming. That night, as the last rays of sunlight bled orange and indigo across the horizon, Lina sat beside Atlas in the barn-turned dormitory. The air smelled of straw and lavender soap. Kids laughed faintly in the distance. New voices learning to rise again. She reached for the blue ribbon that lay crumpled beside her. "I know you hated it," she whispered, tying it gently around one of the wooden beams above their shared bunk. "But to me it wasn't about the color. It meant we made it." Atlas rested his chin on her knee, eyes half-lidded, body finally healed. Lina looked down at him and smiled. "We're just getting started, aren't we?" His tail thumped twice. And in that moment, quiet, unspectacular, and infinite, they weren't just survivors anymore. They were a team. The city hadn't changed. The snow still piled in soft, dirty heaps along the gutters. The air still carried that mixture of exhaust, old dreams, and something like hunger. Buildings towered the same. Traffic lights blinked like tired sentinels. But Lina had. She stepped off the train with a quiet breath, one hand gripping the strap of her backpack, the other resting gently at her side where Atlas walked in perfect rhythm. No leash, just trust. His coat had grown thicker since those days beneath stairwells and torn tarps. His gait was confident now, even regal. But it was his eyes that told the whole story. Alert, steady, unshakable. A police dog once. A stray then. A guardian now. They passed the alley near 9th where she'd once hidden for nearly 3 nights, too scared to sleep. It was empty today. Just a trail of half-frozen footprints and an overturned trash can. But Lina paused. She crouched, pulled a vacuum-sealed meal from her bag, something high in protein, something that wouldn't freeze too fast, and tucked it inside a plastic crate wedged between the wall and a dumpster. She added a folded blanket. Not new, but clean. No notes, no messages. Just kindness, left like a whisper. They moved block by block. At the edge of the old subway station, Lina stopped again. This one hurt more. She used to sit there, knees pulled to chest, voice barely above a whisper, as she sang old lullabies she remembered from somewhere long gone. That corner had been her stage, her confessional, her final place of hope. She left gloves there now, thick ones, with lined fleece. As she stood, a man with graying hair and a tattered scarf passed by. He glanced down at the offering, then at her. His eyes flicked to Atlas, ever watchful, and he nodded once. Not recognition, not thanks. Just understanding. It was enough. They reached the old metal stairwell last. It was rustier now, the bolts more jagged. But it still groaned the same way when wind moved through it, like a forgotten song humming through steel. This had been their first shelter. She could still remember the sound Atlas made, half whimper, half sigh, as she had approached that night, her arms empty except for the single blanket she would soon give him. It had felt like foolishness then. Now she knew it had been courage. Lina sank to her knees beside the bin. Atlas sat beside her, his body pressed lightly against hers, not for protection this time, but in solidarity. She pulled out the last items from her pack, a waterproof tarp, 2 energy bars, and a thermos she filled with warm broth before leaving the estate, all placed neatly beneath the steps. Above, someone stirred. She looked up. A girl, maybe 13, eyes wide and sunken. She pulled back slightly into the shadows, unsure. Lina didn't speak. She didn't need to. She stood slowly, brushed the snow from her knees, and turned to go. But before she left, she placed one item at the edge of the curb, a soft, hand-sewn pouch. Inside 3 folded dollars, a pair of wool socks, and a paper card that read, "When you're ready, you're not alone." Below, an address. The sanctuary. Lina didn't wait to see if the girl would take it. That wasn't the point. The sun had begun to set as she and Atlas made their way back toward the station. The golden light spilled across the concrete, casting long shadows behind them. Atlas walked a step ahead now, ears perked as if clearing a path. People looked. Not the way they used to, pitying, suspicious, or indifferent. Now they looked with curiosity, with something like quiet respect, because there was a girl in a second-hand jacket and boots, too big for her, walking like she belonged. Because there was a dog beside her who'd once been broken and left in the snow, now wearing his scars like armor. Because neither had to explain themselves anymore. At the platform, Lina sat on a bench and waited for the train. Atlas rested his head on her lap, his eyes closing, not out of exhaustion, but peace. She watched the lights flicker down the tunnel. She thought of Evelyn, of Scout the blind retriever, of the younger kids at the estate who still whispered in their sleep and flinched at door slams. And she thought of that girl beneath the stairwell. Maybe she'd come, maybe she wouldn't. But the blanket was warm, the food would last, and the door, for once, had been left open. Lina stroked Atlas's ear gently. "We made it out," she whispered, "but I don't think we ever really left." His tail thumped once. She smiled. The train pulled in, doors hissing open like an exhale. And this time, when she stepped through, she didn't look back. She didn't need to. It began with a snowfall. Not the kind that bites or blinds, but the gentle kind. The kind that muffles the world into stillness. The kind you can hear landing if you're quiet enough. Lina stood by the window of the main lodge, mug of tea cooling in her hands. Outside, the evergreens bowed with fresh weight. The kennels were quiet. Most of the trainees were already tucked in. Inside, the fireplace hummed softly, casting long orange shadows along the walls. Atlas lay on the rug, head resting between his paws, breath steady. For once, he was not alert. He wasn't scanning doorways or flinching at loud noises. He wasn't calculating the distance between Lina and strangers. He wasn't standing between her and the world. He was just still. Earlier that day, Evelyn had said nothing as she handed Lina a soft velvet box. Inside was a small brass tag polished, engraved, new. It read, "Atlas, Companion, Guardian, Teacher." Below, a date, not of birth, but of beginning. Lina hadn't cried, not then, but now, watching him rest, she felt the warmth behind her eyes return, not out of sadness, not even nostalgia, but the overwhelming realization that something had come full circle, that something once broken had found shape again. Atlas stirred slightly, one ear twitching toward her. Lina smiled, knelt beside him, and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. His fur had thickened over the months, covering the once visible ribs. But beneath it, the scar was still there, subtle, like a whispered memory. She leaned in, close enough that her breath brushed his ear. "Off duty, soldier," she whispered. He blinked slowly. No bark, no shift in posture. Just a low, satisfied breath as he let his eyes close. And in that moment, Lina understood. Home wasn't just a roof. It wasn't walls or safety or even warmth. It was this silence, this trust, this permission to rest. Because for dogs like Atlas, rest wasn't given, it was earned. And for girls like Lina, peace wasn't found, it was built, piece by aching piece. She sat with him for a long while, the fire crackling beside them. The snow thickened outside, blanketing the ground in white. Tomorrow would come. The trainees would wake, the dogs would bark, and the chores would resume. Life, now full and steady, would ask for her again, but tonight there was nothing left to do. Lina tucked the velvet box back into her pocket and lay beside him, curled against his warmth the way she had that very first night under the stairwell. Back then, she'd had nothing to give but a torn blanket and a trembling hand. Now she had something more, herself. In the silence, the wind picked up, but inside, the fire danced, and a girl and her dog slept beneath its glow. No alarms, no commands, just the slow, steady heartbeat of two souls who had walked through frost and fear and come out the other side. In a world often too fast, too cold, and too forgetful, stories like Lina and Atlas's remind us of something timeless, the quiet, unwavering bond between a human soul and a loyal dog. Atlas was more than a German shepherd. He was a survivor, a protector, a mirror to every scar Lina carried, and Lina, in return, offered something just as rare: unconditional love, without ownership, healing without expectation. This story speaks to the overlooked, to the dogs left behind when their purpose was served, to the children society fails to see, and to the power of second chances. In Atlas's eyes we see the weight of memory. In Lina's hands we witness the rebirth of trust. German shepherds are more than working dogs. They are warriors with hearts, guardians with ghosts, and companions with an extraordinary capacity to love again. And sometimes, all it takes is a shared blanket on a cold night to start something bigger than either of them imagined. Let this story remind us, kindness doesn't need much. Just a moment, a gesture, a choice. And that even in the harshest winter, love can find its way home.